Clear prop.
Star 738, Yankee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear subject, 1 Charlie Bravo, exited in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and designated pilot examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby. How are you?
I'm great. We have a guest again this week. Welcome back to the show once more, Mr. Pat Brown. How are you today, Pat?
I'm doing great, thanks. This is probably the 4th or 5th time.
I know. I've lost count. I appreciate you coming back so many times.
It's like a bad penny, man. You just keep turning up.
And what we haven't talked about yet today was Pat made a post on the Facebook recently that you got your Master Pilot Award. 52 years of aviating. It took them a couple of years for you to get the certificate. Congratulations on that.
Thanks. That's what happens when you hang around long enough.
I'm not even 50 yet. So like my mind is blown.
Thanks a lot for that.
Sorry about that. Wally, how long have you been flying now?
Well, August 31st will be the anniversary of my 40th. That's when I took my first flying lesson. My first real flying lesson. I actually started in 1967 with my father. I was 4 years old, but that doesn't really count. But August 31st, 1981 is when I actually hopped in an airplane and sat in the left seat and said, okay, I'm going to do this for a living.
And I don't know how this, what's the demarc for that? Is that like first lesson? Is that student pilot certificate?
First medical.
Okay. First medical. Interesting. I'll never get there. I'll just be honest. I'm never going to get to 50 years.
You never know.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm going to.
I never thought I would.
I don't think I'm going to make 90-something years old. So, but congratulations. It's cool to see that certificate, and that's a pin, I guess, that was posted.
They give
as
you
well.
a pin, and they give you a copy of every piece of paper that the FAA has in your file.
Really?
And fortunately, mine is only maybe a half an inch thick. I wouldn't want any thicker than that. They give you a copy of everything that they've got in their file. There's a nice certificate that recognizes with a picture of Orville and Wilbur on there, and Secretary Dixon signed it.
Wow.
So it's I'll tell you, it's a little bit mind-boggling. I never, when I'm not going to tell you quite how old I am, but back when I was that age, taking my first lesson, I never envisioned.
Wow.
52 years now. I never envisioned any of this stuff. I never started. My entire life has been a happy accident.
Right.
I've never had a plan.
Yeah, I didn't think I'd be sitting here a few years ago either. But I'm happy doing it every day. So that's really, really cool.
That's what counts.
Well, when you get that award, obviously you've been flying a long time.
Yeah.
And today we're going to take all those 50 plus years of experience between Pat, almost 40 with Wally, and now I'm almost up to 5 years.
There you go.
6 years. I guess I've been training for 6 years. So that puts us at 98 years experience here.
Yeah.
One more year, we're going to have over 100 between the three of us. So we're going to take all those years and we're going to talk traffic pattern etiquette today.
In a non-towered field.
At a non-tower field.
Yeah.
So lots of us, specifically this airport, have a whole lot of help with the tower controllers. And big city like this, we've got a number of towered airports. But today's all about traffic pattern etiquette at non-towered airports. So you brought this up, Pat. Tell us, where's the stick been lately? Where's the thought process been around traffic pattern etiquette?
Well, one of the things that I think really kind of sparked my interest in this was when I was doing flight instructor refresher clinics, the weekend deals where flight instructors come to renew their certificates, and I was teaching the course. And one of the statistics that we kept coming up with when we got into one of the modules that was talking about safety and the safety culture at flight schools was the fact that the majority of mid-air collisions occur within 5 miles of a non-towered airport on a clear day.
Yeah.
And so if you extrapolate that a little bit, a lot of those also will happen in the traffic pattern. And some of that is just because of just poor execution of the traffic pattern itself, maybe not understanding how the traffic pattern is supposed to work. It's a non-towered field. Jason Shepard at E048 calls it a pilot-controlled environment. I'm not sure I like that term, but he's not wrong.
Sure.
So it's up to us as individual pilots to control what we do at a non-towered field, because obviously there's no tower watching over us telling us what to do. And I teach out of a non-tower field. I do examinations out of a non-tower field. Wally does the same thing. He's out of Cleveland. There's no tower there. So it's out of self-preservation as much as anything. I think that this has become of interest for me.
So I would think all of us have flown to a non-towered field at some point or another. And you talk about the people in the pattern. I think the big time that I'm thinking about the non-tower field is the entry and the departure, right? There's a lot of mistakes and errors that I hear people make. We'll get to radio communication in a second, but what do you think some of the common errors are with people entering, and then we'll talk about departing? Let's focus on entering the pattern first. What's some pet peeves or heartburn that you see on a regular basis out there, both of you, Wally and Pat?
You want to go first, Wally?
You take it, Pat.
Right.
You're leading this.
Put you on the spot there. Thank you so much. There's a big smile
Wally
on
will
your
go
face
second.
right now.
Wally will go second.
Well, I gave you a minute to think about it, right?
Right.
Well, first of all, let's talk a little bit about what the literature says. So if you look at AIM, Chapter 4 specifically, and 4-3-3, if you really want to get into the weeds, really only gives you one recommendation on a traffic pattern entry, and that's the 45 degree to the downwind leg, the one that we all learn. But it doesn't say anything about what happens if you're coming in on the other side of the field. For that, you've got to look at the Airplane Flying Handbook, and that's Chapter 7. And that recommends a couple of different ways. It recommends, the first recommendation is to cross over the airport at 500 feet above the highest traffic pattern altitude, fly outbound 2 miles from the downwind leg, not from the runway, but from the downwind leg, and then make your descending turn back into the traffic pattern.
And real quick, because I think I pin myself to private pilots because I don't fly every day like everybody else. A private pilot, when I was a private pilot, I always thought the highest traffic pattern altitude was 1,000 feet above the airport elevation. What is the highest traffic pattern altitude at an airport? Is it always 1,000 feet?
Well, it's 1,000. It's generally, there are some exceptions, and usually you'll find that in the chart supplement. But it's generally 1,000 feet AGL. Twins and turbines typically fly 1,500 feet AGL. So if you're talking about crossing the airport traffic area and pattern at 500 feet above the highest traffic pattern, you're talking about 500 feet above 1,500 feet AGL, which makes it 2,000 feet AGL.
This could be a big deal if a Cessna thinks that they're supposed to fly 1,500 feet, and that lo and behold, there's a twin in the pattern.
Yeah, right? Or a Pilatus or King Air or something like that, or a Citation, and that happens at West Houston quite frequently. We have a lot of that kind of corporate traffic coming into West Houston. And so somebody will be entering the traffic pattern on this what they call the teardrop entry to the downwind leg, crossing the airport at 1,600 feet indicated, and think that they're doing what they're supposed to do, and they're not. Of course, one thing that makes that a little bit of a challenge at some airports is you may have some sort of controlled airspace above that. Sure. If we go too far east out of West Houston Airport, we're going to hit the surface area of Class Bravo airspace. So now you have to, all right, well, now there's some common sense that's going to have to be involved in all of this. But back to the kind of the textbook thing is 500 feet above the highest traffic pattern altitude, which is 2,000 feet. So now the book says go 2 miles past the downwind leg. Well, how far away from the runway is the downwind leg? And that really depends on the type of airplane that you're flying. If you're flying a J3, it's probably a quarter mile. If you're flying a Cirrus, it might be a little bit further. A Comanche or some faster airplane, it might be a little bit further out. So I have students that are asking for guidance, and even applicants after the check ride is over asking for guidance. And so I kind of look at it like this. It says go 2 miles past the downwind leg. So let's assume the downwind leg is at least a mile out. So let's measure now from the center line of the runway. Let's go at least 3 miles away from the airport, maybe 4, depending on how busy the airport is. Then you make your descending turn back in and announce that you're X miles, in the case of West Houston, east of the airport. We're entering a 45 degree to the downwind leg. The other way that Chapter 7 of the Airplane Flying Handbook recommends is just enter midfield at traffic pattern altitude and then turn downwind at the midfield point, giving way to any traffic that might be entering the pattern at the 45. And that's okay. I guess the only peeve I have with that one is that depending on the kind of airplane that you're flying and when you start slowing down, you may have a hard time as you turn midfield. You don't have very much time before you beam the approach into the runway. And are you configured? Are your flaps in? Is your gear down? Again, there's a lot of things that go into this. It's you can look at the textbook and what the textbook says, but at some point you have to apply some common sense and some airmanship to all of this, if that makes any sense at all. And what really got my attention on this teardrop entry thing, I was telling you before we turned on the microphones, was several years ago. In fact, twice in the last several years, I've almost been involved in mid-air collisions where somebody is doing an improper teardrop entry to the downwind leg, and it's almost gotten us entering properly, because if you don't go far enough out and you start that teardrop turn back into the airport, you're either going to be conflicting with the downwind traffic, and I'm talking about head on, or depending on where you start the turn or how shallow or steep the turn is, you're going to be conflicting with the crosswind traffic, and either one of those are just fatalities waiting to happen. And unfortunately, there's a lot of history with that kind of stuff happening.
Yeah, and I think a lot of technology, and we're at non-controlled airports, but we probably all have an iPad, and we're assuming that everybody's got ADS-B now, and they're on that little screen. But at a non-controlled airport, 50 miles outside of town, they might not have ADS-B. There could be a plane out there working that pattern without a radio and without ADS-B. Yeah. And I think we might get too dependent on that little triangle of traffic, and that's not always going to be a reality at a non-controlled field.
You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Wally, what are your thoughts?
Well, as we sit right here, we've already talked about a couple of different ways to enter a traffic pattern. And the other caveat is that these are recommended. Mm-hmm. Recommended. They're not required. So, I mean, when I go to a restaurant and the waiter recommends the fish, I'm not ordering the fish. Okay, I'll take the chicken. I don't care what you recommend. So, it is recommended, and hopefully everybody is following the recommendations of these traffic pattern entries, but there is some room for interpretation. There is some wiggle room. This is not required.
Well, we've all probably seen someone flying left traffic in an airport that has a big R on the map, right? I mean, again, recommended. It's on the chart. Did we look at the chart? Did we know what it says? There's recommended and best practices and all that go out the window if you look down at the other end of the airfield and see somebody coming at you on final, right?
Right.
We should all land into the wind, but we don't always do that either, right? So.
That's true. In fact, the only thing that's about the only thing that's actually set in stone, if you look at 91.126, that's the reg that says all turns shall be made to the left, unless otherwise specified. Right. And you would know that by looking at the little RP below the airport diagram, or the segmented circle, for example. And a couple of examples here in the Houston area would be Hilltop Lakes. The restaurant just reopened up there at Hilltop Lakes a few months ago. That's right-hand traffic if you're landing to the south. It's left-hand traffic if you're landing to the north, and the segmented circle tells you that. If you go down to Texas Gulf Coast Regional, you'll see an RP below all the airport data block, and it's right traffic to runway 17, which of course makes that left traffic to runway 35. But yet you'll still hear people talking about entering a left base for runway 17.
Oh, sure.
And you just, and if I hear that, I will gently correct them. It's right-hand traffic down here, because that's a busy airport, and that's something you just can't let go. You don't want to get into an argument with them. That's another thing that is a pet peeve at non-towered fields, is you'll get the local Gestapo, basically, that decides that he's going to correct, or he or she is going to correct everything that's wrong, and they're going to do it on the radio in front of everybody, and that's not the way to do it.
Yeah, this airport tower was closed for many hours of the day during the COVID stretch, right? And there were a lot of wannabe air traffic controllers working the radios, and a lot of, I would say, discourse on which way were the winds blowing, right? On calm days, there was a lot of people landing different directions, and 3 runways, man, that gets real hairy real quick, right? Mm-hmm. So I did not fly much during those days around here when the tower was closed. Lots about entries there. I've seen a lot of departure mistakes as well. I know we're talking about the pattern, but I think a student pilot that is flying a long cross country probably doesn't know exactly what they're supposed to do. I'm a stickler on the 300 feet from pattern altitude before I turn. I think a low and slow turn is a scary thing for me. Obviously, it should be for any pilot.
Yep.
But what about some departure thoughts? Maybe the bad that you've seen, and maybe some best practices that you both would recommend to students and applicants out there.
Well, as far as departing the traffic pattern, again, I keep going back to what does the book say. I mean, that's, first of all, let's start with what the book says. And looking at AIM, again, Chapter 4, talks about at a non-towered field, you fly straight out to 1,000 feet. This is departing the traffic pattern, straight out to 1,000 feet, and then make a 45-degree turn in the direction of the traffic pattern in order to leave the traffic pattern. So a left-hand turn, 45 degrees off the runway heading at a non-towered field in a left-hand traffic pattern would be what you do. Same thing in a right-hand traffic pattern, 1,000 feet, 45-degree turn to the right. If you're going straight out, AIM recommends just climb to 1,000 feet and just continue going straight out. So that's what the book says. There's no guidance that I have been able to find. Again, we were talking about this before the mics went hot. There's no guidance that I can find about how to exit the traffic pattern if you want to go the other direction. So the best I can suggest to my students and applicants when we get to the debrief portion of the check ride is go straight out. If you're left-hand traffic, go straight out and climb to 1,000 feet, continuing going straight out until you get to what you consider to be a safe distance from the airport, and then make your right turn on course if that's the way you're going to do it. I've seen people that have turned crosswind and then turned downwind and then crossed the airport to go in the opposite direction. In other words, make kind of a big circle. And I don't have a real issue with that, except that you really need to be cognizant of the fact that you may have someone entering the upwind side of the airport to fly a rectangular traffic pattern and then flying a crosswind and downwind base and final. And what if that person happens to be crosswind about the time you turn across the airport? So, there's a lot of what ifs and probably highly unlikely things that can happen, but they can happen, and that's why we need to be thinking in advance and listening for incoming traffic, hoping people are making proper radio calls, because that's another big deal, is just making proper, accurate radio calls.
Well, something that just jumped in my mind, and it didn't earlier when we were discussing it, but maybe that maybe that recommendation of fly to 1,000 feet and then make a 45 left-hand turn is because if something took off behind me faster, where should it be passing me? It should be passing me on the right. So I can see where maybe I incorporate a 45 degree for another mile or two, just in case, half of a clearing turn, and then maybe come back. Yeah. That could be part of that recommendation. I'm just speculating, of course.
And then of course, you mentioned the 300 feet thing. Well, again, go back to the book. AIM says remaining in the traffic pattern, turn crosswind within 300 feet of traffic pattern altitude. Within 300 feet of traffic pattern altitude. So, at an airport that's let's see, at sea level, then 700 feet would be the lowest. and 1,000 feet, which is traffic pattern altitude, would be the highest. So within 300 feet of traffic pattern altitude is when you start your crosswind turn. One of the things that I see at our airport, and I suspect Wally sees at his Cleveland airport, is when you're taking off and want to go the other direction, not remaining in the traffic pattern, and wanting to go in the opposite direction from the direction of the traffic pattern, that at somewhere around 500 feet above the ground or so, they'll start their right-hand turn out of the traffic pattern. And again, there's nothing that says you can't do that. It's not regulatory in nature, the AIM or the airplane flying handbook for that matter, but it's certainly not good practice.
Sure.
What do you think, Wally?
I totally agree. Again, we're just as you said, the AIM is non-regulatory, and a lot of this that we're talking about is techniques, if you will, best practices. But the bottom line is we're trying not to die, not to hit another airplane.
Right.
So yeah, these are all excellent excellent points.
Yes, so let's talk a little bit of radio communication, something that I know we've talked about. Is there any traffic in the pattern? I'll just start with that one. I guess. Please advise. I know that's everyone's favorite.
You know, if anybody who I know well is listening to this podcast, they know what's coming next. That one is probably my number one pet peeve. Any traffic in the area, please advise. First of all, again, going back to the book, if you look at AIM, Chapter 4-1.9, paragraph G, to be specific, that is the only phrase that's specifically called out in AIM as improper phraseology and should never be used under any circumstances. It's the only one.
Wow.
Yet you hear it all the time. And it's a useless radio call because, first of all, if nobody answers, what do you know? Really, nothing that you didn't know already. If 2 or 3 or 4 people decide to be good Samaritans and answer all at once, what happens? You get a bunch of squealing radios in your ear. What do you know? Nothing more than you really knew next.
And they're all on top of each other, so you really don't hear any of them
Yeah,
either.
and you really don't know where they are at all.
Right.
So again, best practice, my recommendation is if there's an airport with a Unicom, West Houston Unicom, Cessna 12345, 6 miles to the west, inbound landing. Do you have any reported traffic in the pattern? If you've got to ask that question, if you absolutely cannot help yourself, then try to talk to one person. I tell this story in my Rusty Pilot seminars and really almost any other chance I've got. So probably some folks listening have heard this, but I was flying out of Brenham several years ago and with a student in the airplane, and I heard, this is the radio call I heard, and I'm not making this up. It was Brenham traffic, Phenom 12345, we're 10 miles north inbound of the RNF 16 into Brenham. Any traffic in the area, known or unknown, please advise. Okay. And I boy, I so wanted to key the mic and make some smart ass comment, but I'm a professional.
I probably would have said something for sure.
But but once or twice I've succumbed to the weakness, and I'll key the mic and I'll just say, buy low, sell high.
Well, good tips for sure.
I think making that comment, making that call, any traffic in the area, please advise. I think so. If you don't hear anything, I would guess people would get a false sense of security.
Yeah.
Well,
nobody's talking, so
I've shared this before on the show. I watched the Smithsonian Channel, this air disaster show, which makes no sense to a lot of people that I watch that show, but hopefully I'm learning. But the most recent show I watched, it was a big King Air of some sort passenger plane, and they kind of did that any traffic. It was an uncontrolled airport, and sadly enough, there was a citation waiting to go that was on the wrong radio channel, and they were making their calls too. And there was some small single-engine plane behind them that was going to go. Well, the airline that was coming in was asking, and they saw the bigger citation, and they asked, and the small single-engine behind it answered for them.
Yes.
And unfortunately, the citation still took off, and they hit at the midpoint of the field. and it was a terrible disaster because I think everyone perished. But you can't assume anything in these situations, and radio calls are scary enough if they're not being made or heard. And man, hopefully we're all on the right channel. That leads me to our conversation around what should we be saying when we're coming in. Should we just be saying November 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 miles westbound inbound for a full stop? Does that tell people enough about my aircraft and what I'm intending to do?
No, the aim is specific. Again, aim is non-regulatory, but it's very specific about aircraft call signs, and it basically says that you should say the manufacturer name or the model name of the airplane. So Cessna 1234 X-ray meets that requirement, but Skyhawk 1234 X-ray meets this requirement even better, I believe. First of all, it tells people what kind of airplane you're looking for. Sure, a Skyhawk and a Skylane and a 206 all look the same from 3 miles away. It's a high-wing Cessna, but if you are talking air traffic control, they now know the performance capability of the airplane. They know that a Skyhawk is about 100-knot airplane, and if you're 8 miles out and a Bonanza is 8 miles out, they know to put the Bonanza in front of you. But just saying November 1, 2, 3, 4 X-ray, it says that you're a U.S. registered airplane or a U.S. registered aircraft, I should say. It could be a helicopter. So you're supposed to say the airplane type.
Yeah, and anything other significant value that would help other people. Woodstock used to be very, very bright, very different, right? So if Pat was flying in, he could say yellow 152 or 150, but that would help me if I was in the pattern O, so that I wasn't making the mistake of another high wing aircraft that might have been white or blue had I been in the pattern or wanting to stay in the pattern. Yeah,
you're referring to the little yellow 152 that I used to fly around, and oftentimes I would say yellow Cessna entering a left downwind, the yellow Cessna 103 Uniform Charlie entering a left downwind or something along those lines, because it was a bright yellow Cessna. You and I have had a conversation too, Wally, with regard to radio calls. That last call seems to be making its way around the country more and more and more and more. And I know you had some thoughts about that too.
Yeah, that's another one that I'm not sure where a lot of this stuff comes from, but that is something that is coming. I'm hearing a lot. Another thing I hear a lot is, and I think people get this from watching TV, watching movies. I have eyes on the traffic.
Mm-hmm.
I've got them on my scope, you mean?
No, well, they
have that because they see them on their iPad.
Yeah. And I think what we want is effective communication, and I think an English-speaking controller probably understands what you mean. But you get to the point where if you start flying internationally, you're speaking to controllers whose native language is not English, and they may not know what you're talking about when you say things like that. So try to stick to the standard phraseology.
Got them on the fish finder, doesn't qualify.
Oh yeah, got them on the fish finder.
Or the metal detector, got them on the metal detector.
The other thing is the mix in IFR traffic and VFR traffic. A lot of times we're doing instrument approaches to uncontrolled airports. So you may have a couple people in the traffic pattern doing touch and goes, and you call up and say, we are over Jimbo intersection inbound for landing. Well, the VFR guy may not know where Jimbo intersection is. So just saying 8 miles north of the airport inbound, it gives a lot more information than saying I'm at such and such an intersection, or we're holding at a fix near the airport. Just say where you are. We're 6 miles out, 6 miles north.
Likewise, when I go to some other areas, they'll say I'm inbound just over the Christmas tree farm.
Yeah,
and great. I don't live around here. I don't know where your Christmas tree farm is, or that football field, or that high school. Local landmarks that are known to the locals. It doesn't help much to the pilots that are coming in from far away.
No, that's right. Another thing that doesn't help very much is when someone announces that they're taking the active. And my first thought is, where are you taking it? I'm going to need it in a few minutes.
Exactly.
You know, how are you going to get it off the ground? But if you look at Advisory Circular 90-66B, which talks a tremendous amount about traffic patterns, traffic pattern etiquette, recommended radio communications, right-of-ways and rights of way and things like that. If you look at that, it will give you some really good guidance on the fact that there's no active runway at a non-towered field. It's the runway in use.
Right.
In fact, the advisory circular will actually say that it's the runway in use. And let's talk about, you know, back in the day when New Braunfels and San Marcos were both non-towered fields. Palacios down to Coast is a non-towered field. On any given day at any of those airports, any two runways could be in use because the wind was split right down the middle. Mm-hmm. So especially if you're operating at an airport with more than one strip of pavement, then taking the active doesn't say anything. It could be either one of those runways could be active. Better to say Cessna 12345 is taking off runway 15. When you clear the runway, if you absolutely feel you have to make that radio call, which is not necessary, I'm clear of runway 15 or something, so that somebody either taxiing out for takeoff or just as importantly, somebody coming in from on course who's been listening to the radio understands that, okay, it is runway 15 that's in use, not the other runway that may be crossing it that could also be a possibility because the AWAS said it could be.
Yeah, and you mentioned a couple names there. I think the last point I'll make for today was I went to a non-controlled field in my training north of Houston, and my instructor said this we used to call this airport something else. It's got a new name, and you know the locals might still call it the old name, and you might be referencing something you're looking in a chart supplement or on a VFR map. You kind of got to be situationally aware of what those people might be talking about. Lots of 121.9s out here, or 122.9s out here, or airports all over the south part of Texas.
Yeah, very true.
You got to be aware of who's talking and who's in the pattern with you. We saw a plane coming the other direction at that field one time, and they were using the old name and we were using the new name. Luckily, no incident, but you got to be aware of all these little intricacies of entering these patterns with a radio, maybe without a radio. Somebody might not have a radio. Lots of things that could cause these incidents in the traffic pattern for sure.
Well, we talked about traffic pattern directions, right versus left, but with regard to the change in names, we have an example right here of a non-towered field, just 50 miles south of where we're sitting right here, Texas Gulf Coast Regional. A number of years ago was Brazoria County Airport. And then it got changed to Texas Gulf Coast Regional, and you still have folks that call, not so much now as a few years ago, but you still have folks calling up and calling it Brazoria County.
Yeah.
So, or Brazoria County as the AWAS used to call it. So, yeah. So you got to be watched for that stuff.
I think at the end of the day that, you got to just keep your eyes out the window. We, Pat, I know you've flown out of a airport southwest of Houston where they have a pretty significant ag operation, and those guys are usually not talking on the radio, and they're taking off in the direction that they're going, and they're landing in the direction that they're coming from, irregardless of pretty much the wind doesn't really
Any
matter.
other rules?
Yeah.
So
guidance?
you may be in the pattern. There was a day I was down there doing a check ride, and we were in the traffic pattern, and we were on final, and my applicant said there's an airplane about to land the other way. And I thought, okay, what do you want to do? And he said, well, we better go around. I thought, well, that's a great call. And we did that, and as I was actually flying an airline trip that same day, and I was going into Las Vegas and had to do a go-around in Las Vegas in a 737. I thought, wow, this is two real go-arounds in one day 2 different airports, 2 different airplanes. I mean, and they were the real deal. They weren't just, hey, let's go around for the heck of going around.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully all of you learned a little something or have something to think about, maybe something new to read. Go check out those textbooks that Pat referenced. Get better with your traffic pattern etiquette at non-towered fields. As always, fly safe and stay behind the prop.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at BehindTheProp.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.